All right, so let's begin. So I just wanted to thank everyone for joining us today for today's webinar. My name is Steph. I'm the marketing director at Refactr, and I work closely with Mike and Bill to put together our joint webinars. For those of us not yet familiar with Mike, Mike is the co-founder and chief architect and CEO at Refactr. He began his career working on F-15 fighter jet weapon systems and later as a cybersecurity engineer in the Air Force. And he has been a serial entrepreneur ever since. His counterpart, Bill, is the software architect for security best practices at the Center for Internet Security, where he's the senior tech leader for the architecture and implementation of products and services available to CIS Secure Suite members. Bill has been largely responsible for developing CISCAT, so he's the perfect person to speak to you about it today. And before I hand it over to Mike and Bill, I just have two short announcements. The first is that this is a recorded webinar and its slides will be available, so please watch your email for those items, likely at the end of today or tomorrow morning. And then lastly, we'll reserve the last 10 minutes for a Q&A. So if you have any questions, please drop them into the chat and we'll cover them at the end of the presentation. So without a moment longer, I'll hand it over to Bill and Mike to get us started.
Awesome, thanks, Steph. All right, go ahead, Bill.
All right, thank you very much. My name is Bill Munyan. Like Steph said, I work at CIS. I've been with the organization a little bit more than 8 years now, and like was mentioned, primarily on development of our configuration assessment tool, CISCAT. So as you can see on the slide here, it's got the CIS mission. It's pretty simple. We want everyone to have a secure online experience. Our security best practices group enables these best practices through leveraging the community of subject matter experts around the world who, thankfully for us, volunteer their time and contribute their expertise for the benefit of everyone. Our mission begins at the highest levels with the CIS controls and the CIS benchmarks. The controls and benchmarks really do provide the framework for effective cyber defense. The controls are internationally recognized for bringing together expert insight about threats, defensive options, business technologies into an effective, coherent, and simpler way to manage an organization's security improvement program. The most recent versions have taken on a much more horizontal approach as well, with the introduction of what we call implementation groups to help organizations with different levels of security experience prioritize the sub-control levels of the already prioritized 20 controls. And through the coordination of, again, the subject matter experts, vendors, and community consensus, controls and benchmarks have become the industry standard for both cyber hygiene and secure configuration guidance. State and federal guidelines have specifically mentioned the controls, and other organizations such as PCI security guidelines specifically call out and reference our benchmarks. Go to the next slide. So auditing and remediating CIS benchmark recommendations manually is a pretty arduous task. For example, your standard kind of Red Hat Linux or Windows 10 type benchmark will have probably over 400 different recommendations in them. To kind of go through that and do that configuration manually on a number of different machines in your environment, again, takes a lot of time and puts in a lot of effort. So part of the vision of our security best practices group here at CIS is what we call speeding policy to implementation. We want our members to be able to obtain our content ready for automated assessment as soon as possible after a benchmark is published. And Secure Suite membership provides software and resources enabling organizations to automate the development, assessment, reporting, and enforcement of our secure configuration standards, including CISCAT Pro Assessor and the CISCAT Pro Dashboard application. The Assessor helps to automate the assessment of CIS benchmark content, as well as other SCAP compatible data streams such as DISA-STIGs or US government configuration baseline, and provides a pretty powerful command line interface and enables both host-based or local assessments, as well as has incorporated remote assessment capabilities in an agentless manner. So it can connect remotely to those endpoints, perform the assessments, and remove itself basically from those endpoints without leaving a trace that it has done any sort of assessment. A number of other features, there's over 80 benchmarks that are currently supported in the tool, and it also includes features to assess multiple benchmarks against multiple remote endpoints in a single scanning run. Reporting capabilities include SCAT compatible asset reporting formats, essential for importing into the CISCAT Pro dashboard application, and also has the capability to produce HTML, CSV, different text formats as well. And I think we'll see a sample of the HTML report a little bit later in the demo process. And as part of the work that we've done concurrently here with Refactr, CISCAT now also has the option to report in a structured format. It's a JSON reported format, indicating those recommendations which did not meet the expected criteria. So those recommendations that either failed, were unknown or unable to be evaluated, or produced any sort of error in an easy to use kind of structured format that's able to be used later on down the automation pipeline mechanism. Finally, the CISCAT Pro dashboard application provides a repository for use in time-based monitoring of those results, reporting on differences between results, and the maintenance of exceptions to help document any known or planned deviations from the expected state. Again, kind of monitor the configuration drift as it mentioned on the slide. And all of these, the benchmarks and content and tooling enhancements and reports all comes from community participation, ongoing engagement with our Secure Suite members, such as Refactr, to help us feed a continuous cycle of improvement. So that community involvement feeds content development, that content development feeds automation and automated content enhancements, that feeds all into the tooling and product enhancements, and that tooling feeds back through for more content development, feature requests, operational support, and continuing the improvement cycle over time. Next slide. And then CISCAT Pro does provide excellent tools, again, to assess and monitor that configuration over time. Its capabilities are needed more and more when instances are spun up and taken down quickly in a more DevOps, cloud-based type of environment. So instances may now only be needed for a short time, such as development or integration testing or unit testing type environments. And ensuring that those instances are meeting organizational specifications right out of the box is essential. So even with the automation that CISCAT provides, there's still a little bit of manual work involved sometimes to help remediate and then rescan and again, monitor that configuration. So when working with multiple cloud service providers or in a hybrid environment, automating all of that from start to finish is required and should be pretty seamless. This is where we'll see Refactr come into play and where we'll see their platform really shine. It's a very easy to use platform, and the interface integrates provisioning, CISCAT Pro assessment, remediation, and deployment. It's super easy, resulting in that reusable, versioned, manageable, IT as code type of pipeline. And I think Mike will definitely go into a lot of that more in a few minutes here. So the real bottom line is that CIS helps to produce industry standard, vendor agnostic best practices for secure configurations. CISCAT builds upon that through standards-based automation content and powerful assessment features. Refactr helps to harness that power, building secure configuration assessment into its very versatile, highly scalable DevSecOps platform. And the last thing I'd like to say is that we've been extraordinarily excited and had an extraordinarily positive experience working with Refactr in this effort. And I will take any questions at the end, and I'm happy to talk at length about CISCAT Pro and all of its features. But until then, I will turn the presentation over to Mike, and I think he'll walk us through a little bit about their platform.
Awesome. Thanks, Bill. Really appreciate it. Yeah, and it's been really fun working with CIS, integrating CISCAT into our platform, and I don't know, it's been a pretty long, or I say long journey, but we've been working over the past about year of time, and probably really on the last 6 months of time, getting CISCAT into the platform, which has been exciting. And as we see here, and Bill's talking about, we have a DevSecOps platform. What I like to go over first is kind of like, what is DevSecOps? What is it exactly? And so I look at DevSecOps as being kind of holistic automation. 10 years ago, DevOps added agile infrastructure. Essentially, infrastructure is code to agile software development. And for a long time, security was kind of left out of the mix. And the question has been for the last few years is how do we, not only how do we add security into the mix and add them in an agile type of approach so that they can also be able to deploy and deliver solutions at the speed of DevOps, but also being able to create a feedback loop where their security is involved. It's not a bolt-on into the equation. And this is also where CISCAT and the work we've been doing with CIS comes into play, because you can use CISCAT by itself, but the question is, how do you streamline and add security into an agile type of approach to make sure that it's not just, hey, let's run some CISCAT scans after the fact, but be much more proactive and a part of the overall process. So there's kind of 4 principles of DevSecOps that I see. The first one is, why do we want to do anything manually or configure by hand? We should try to automate everything, including tools like CISCAT. And this goes into kind of a broader approach of automation where we need to look at everything that we're going to automate. And so we've come up with a term called IT as code, and it's really about if you can get it into code or it can become software defined, you should be able to automate it. And moving into the public cloud and infrastructure becoming code and security becoming code and configuration management as code, all of these things should be able to be automated, and they also should be put into an agile process that your organization should be pushing forward on. And it shouldn't just be about software delivery. It should be about everything that you're doing under the IT umbrella holistically. You should look at what you can automate. The second one is, instead of manually responding to alerts and events, we create automation that helps cut down on 2 really important pieces. One, labor overhead. And with the current cybersecurity, DevOps engineer, fill in the blank when it comes to certain types of people that are in high demand and low supply. Some numbers that keep getting thrown out there, and it's either number like in cybersecurity where it's 3 million, 3.5 million, 4 million. So it's not just about cutting down on labor overhead, it's also about being able to do more with your existing talent. And the other one is, if you can have a machine do it, you can eliminate human error. And so if you can do something repeatable, you know exactly how it's going to, what the end result is or the outcome is going to be of the automation you create, you'll be able to cut down on human error. And when we first started on this journey of Refactr, one of our very first partners, that was the main focal point was, hey, if I can do this 15, 20, 100 times over and over and over again, I can get my human error to almost zero, just because I'm having a machine do it. I'm not having a human do something custom every single time. Even if they're using documentation or running through a sequence of steps, there's always that possibility of human error. The third one is, instead of being reactive, we are proactive and use automation to deliver security in an agile approach. And so security should be a part of the overall process. And so in DevSecOps, security is, this is in between dev and ops. And really it's about all teams, everybody delivering, and security should be a part of every single team's solution that they're creating when it comes to not just automation, but then also how they communicate together, how they're able to iterate. Because the more agile every team is, the quicker that they can release what they create, but then also the quicker to also remediate any sort of issues that pop up that you need to. And then also being able to incorporate other things like tools like CISCAT, where you may be deploying infrastructure into whatever cloud provider, but you want to be able to go beyond that and say, hey, you know what? I know exactly what the assessment of this particular operating system is, or cloud account, and so on and so forth. So being able to start incorporating tooling into your process and looking at it, having security as well, being able to provide that in an agile approach. And the fourth one is, instead of configuring security manually, we enforce security controls programmatically. So this goes to my point about remediation, where we really have to focus in on not just security controls and rules, but then, or also how the infrastructure is created, how the configuration of everything is created. So it's not just about the security control or security tools that are able to enforce security controls or do assessments, but it's also everything else that goes around it. So you really want to be able to not just be able to automate your security controls and enforce your security rules or controls, but you also want to think about the impact of anything that you're trying to do from a security automation standpoint, and incorporating that into everything you possibly can when it comes to delivering software-defined solutions. So I'm going to go over the Refactr platform next, and really the problem state of where we started out. So we see that security teams out there really want to be able to plug into the DevOps and traditional IT processes. You know, there's a lot of on-premise and hybrid type of workloads that are out there, and most of the existing CI/CD platforms were made for developers. And so if we want to look at DevSecOps as being holistic to include every single team, it also needs to include security. And security tools are notorious for not really being able to truly develop into the process. You know, a lot of the more forward-thinking DevSecOps tools out there try to incorporate themselves in, but they're still incorporating themselves into existing CI/CD platforms that were made for developers, not for security. And then also from a compliance standpoint, especially when you look at tools like CISCAT, you really want to be able to run assessments and enforce and run remediation, and be able to run that both in the cloud and on premise in a hybrid approach. And the third is really that most DevOps tools were built for developers, not security professionals, and really holistically built for anybody that is under the IT umbrella, because of the fact that you're going to have security and ops as a part of this overall process if you really want to get security as something that is proactively in an agile approach in your organization. So we built what we call a Refactr platform, and our whole goal is to empower security teams to be able to work alongside DevOps teams and be able to really move at the speed of DevOps. So the front end has been geared towards the ability to utilize more of a low-code type of approach to enable collaboration, but everything in the platform is backed by open source tools and technologies and other super cool tools like CISCAT. And our other piece is to be able to tie into any environment anywhere, whether it's on-premise, in the cloud. Shouldn't matter where the environment is, you should be able to create and run your automation and all of the automation content wherever you want. And then also we can plug into existing DevOps and cloud management workflows. And that's super important because there's a lot of organizations out there that want to be able to tie in. And we even talk with organizations that want to build up some infrastructure and be able to run a CISCAT, the CISCAT assessor. And how do you plug that into an existing software delivery type pipeline? And so we can plug into other workflows as well, which is super awesome, because that way you can have the ability to leverage what the current process you already have, or if you want to do something completely greenfield as well, you can use our platform as a standalone system as well. So you have options whether you want to tie in or you want to use it standalone. but it's really about the flexibility of being able to do what you need to do when it comes to being able to create an automation and tie into other systems. So some of the tools we support, and we'll go over today in the demo. So CloudFormation, CISCAT Assessor, we have that built in as a first-class module, and we'll show you how that works in the platform and ties into other content. And then other tools like HashiCorp and Red Hat and so on. And so our goal is that you can build automation pipelines that map to particular outcomes and also create reusable pipelines, because it's all about being able to create something once and reuse it over and over and over again. And another piece that we saw out there, which was a big pain for a lot of organizations, was to be able to incorporate credentialing right into the pipeline. And so we have built-in credentials that you can utilize and drop right into your pipeline to make it easy to be able to tie into external systems, because that's super critical when it comes to being able to tie into different tooling and then being able to authenticate against different systems. You really need something that's super easy and flexible to be able to do that as well. And then recently, and this was actually with our CIS announcement around our integration with CISCAT into the platform, we also launched a self-hosted runner. So now you can actually run our backend wherever you want. So on cloud, on premise, and you get a full run history of everything. So if you go run it and you see, and we'll see that in the demo, you'll be able to know exactly what happened in each step inside of your overall pipeline. And then you can also run parallel runs. So if you want to run this at scale, if you want to be able to, if you have a need for a lot of different runs at one time, you can actually have a bunch of runners all running as well. So it's super flexible when it comes to where you can run the runner environment. And that's the key, is we want to make sure we can support being able to run anywhere you want to run. You should be able to run and execute your automation. So from a hybrid standpoint, we are built, there's a couple of examples there where you can run on premise, you can run in the cloud. You can, depending upon how you want to be able to run that content, you can decouple your pipelines as well. So maybe some will run on premise, or some will run inside of your own, your own cloud accounts as well. So it's really about figuring out where it makes sense for you to be able to run your automation content. And then you can also tie into our platform through the front-end API. So the goal there is that if you want to tie this into other systems as well, you have the opportunity to do so. And so that way you have the capabilities to also, if your organization has its own platform or you want to be able to tie it in, you can do that as well. Or if you want to just front end it with your own little app that you create, you can do that as well. So super flexible from an architecture standpoint, so that you can run your back-end, essentially automation content, pipelines in our platform and everything, wherever you want. So now is where we're going to get into CISCAT and how we work with CIS and how we have the tool built in. So the goal is really about the outcome of what you're trying to get, right? So if you want to be able to create or identify some assets that you have out there that you're going to want to be able to run a scan against, you also may want to be able to tie into another system to be able to set up a Slack message that says, hey, I kicked off a pipeline and now I notified the team that is working on this to look out for that, to look out for the pipeline when it finishes, and for another message in the future. And then being able to run CISCAT and a scan around being able to run the assessment, and then popping out a report into an external system. So the nice thing about our platform too is we can, you can do an example like this where you can pop it on the Slack, or if you wanted to just tie directly into the CISCAT Pro dashboards, you could do that too. So there's many different ways that you want to be able to get your reporting into another system. You can absolutely do that. This example shows the ability to push the HTML report that you got and being able to have a link to it from an S3 bucket that you'll be able to click on and go view. And then the last one is remediation content. So one of our other partners, MindPoint Group, has created a bunch of different CIS remediation, essentially baselines for remediation around different flavors of operating system and different CIS benchmarks in general. And so we also have content in here to be able to run where you can run an Ansible role that will actually pull in the existing or essentially what Bill talked about earlier, the non-passing rules, so a JSON object, and be able to drop that into the Ansible role pipeline, or essentially the pipeline, and be able to run that remediation content. So the overall goal here is that you have the ability to create different pipelines if you want to run them in isolation. So one of them may be, hey, I want to create some infrastructure that I want to run by itself, like use AWS with CloudFormation. I may want to be able to, in every single pipeline I create, also create a Slack message. So that could be another pipeline. But then I may have specifics that I have for CISCAT that I want to have in here, or that could also be a separate pipeline too. So the goal is that you can kind of mix and match what you want in each step of your overall pipeline. And you have the ability to include other pipelines as well that you may use over and over and over again in other pipelines to do something specific, like send a Slack notification, or like run a CISCAT scan over and over and over again the exact same way. And this goes back to my point earlier, where it's all about repeatability. So when you create something and it's working and you now have a repeatable pipeline, you can use it over and over and over again. And also when new stuff comes out, so there may be a new version of CISCAT, or there may be an update to the Slack API, or there may be a new version of an Ansible role that MindPoint Group comes out with, then you can go ahead and update that inside of our platform in the versioning of that particular pipeline, and have the ability to control the version of what you want to create for each one of these pipelines. So when a new version of CISCAT comes out, you have the ability to, maybe there's something you have to tweak inside of the pipeline. You can go in, update that, save the updated version, and now you have the ability to version yourself without having to do any sort of custom development. And then also being able to control where you want to decouple the pipelines you have so that you can run them by themselves, or you can add them to other pipelines. And that's really the key there. Just in general, when it comes to creating any sort of automation, is really to hone in on, all right, what am I trying to do? What exactly do I have currently? Do I need to tie into existing infrastructure in this example? Is there net new infrastructure that I want to create? And then determine exactly what I want to do in the next sequence of steps, so that by the end of it, not only do I know what I'm getting from this overall pipeline, but then I can absolutely be able to get in a cybersecurity engineer, or even DevOps engineers, like, hey, I don't really want to have to deal with anything when it comes to security. Okay, here you go. Here's a pipeline. Go ahead and run it. So it makes it super easy once you create your reusable pipeline content to be able to then have it available for other people. Because in the grand scheme of things, the real value in general when it comes to any of this is the ability to build, not just build repeatable content, but to be able to also collaborate with other people, whether it's on your same team or it's in other teams, because something like this could be a pipeline that you would hand off to other teams to be able to utilize too. So you can determine what works best for your organization, but it really comes down to what am I trying to accomplish? Who else could actually get value out of using these pipelines that I've created? And then also being able to build stuff and have it available even outside of the security team. Because currently, right now, if you wanted to use any sort of, tool like CISCAT to scan, being able to use the tool and scan systems is great, but then you may want to be able to put it on a schedule, or here where you're being able to do multiple things in a sequence of steps. And so all of a sudden you can find that there's a lot more value to create sort of pipelining automation where you have sequence of steps to do things versus doing things from a command line or doing things from a UI, which obviously will work, but if you want to do it in a repeatable manner, you really have to focus some time and attention on what you need to do to be able to start creating reusable automation for your organization. All right, so I'm going to switch over to a demo. So give me 1 second. And please feel free to ask questions as well in the question box. There should be a Q&A box that you can ask questions in as well as we move along. And at the end, we will also have time for live questions too, if you want to open it up to that. All right, so. All right, that should be better. All right, great. So we're going to show you how CISCAT works in the Refactr platform today. So I'll go into kind of the builder. So this is where you start out and are building out your what we call pipelines. And so you have the ability to start out from first-class modules that we have built in that we support natively in our platform. So CISCAT is one of those modules that we support. And so I showed you the example that had the different steps that map. So here, now we take that example and can map that specifically to a pipeline that we're creating here that is doing exactly what we were saying inside of that slide, where we have the ability to create an instance. This is actually an included pipeline. So this pipeline itself is a separate pipeline that can be run by itself that has one step in it. And we have defined everything that's required to be able to create it using our credentialing system. So you can actually create a credential inside of the credential section in the project, and then you can create a credential variable that you can drop in that credential into your step in your pipeline. And every first-class module that has some sort of credentialing requirement that maps to our credentials we support. So this one, for example, has an AWS credential type that it's using. And then here, everything is actually, we support every single tool natively. So this is one step that has a CloudFormation template in it. And then we also have the ability to create inputs, essentially variables that you can drop in data or do evaluations with our expression engine too. So all of these that you see defined here and with some outputs is being then utilized in here as a pipeline that we dropped in. So we have the ability to drag and drop a reusable pipeline. So I mentioned this earlier. So the real goal is that, obviously you can create from the modules, but then once you create from the modules, you can create from the actual pipelines themselves and drop them in. And each pipeline also has the ability to define outputs on it too. And so the goal here is that we can have this data that can be utilized by CISCAT to be able to know exactly what the IP address is to scan it if we want to do this. Or in this example here, we actually have the ability to also pass in an IP address as well. And so we have the ability to also set up conditionals where we can, depending upon what we want to do, we could set a Boolean to be able to build in infrastructure, or if not, we can have it where here, the example where we're passing in an IP address that we can scan externally. So there's a lot of flexibility in how you can structure the pipeline. But again, it's all about the outcome that you're looking for when you want to build this out. And this is mapping to the example. So we have the create instance here, or if no instance exists, then we will pass in the IP address. If there's no IP address here, then we'll use the IP address that we supplied at the very beginning. So it gives us the flexibility to either create this instance or be able to continue on and just run CISCAT against the external IP that we provide. Again, nesting another pipeline. So the goal here is, so if you wanted to, you could essentially create a step in here that's a module itself as well, like we're doing here with this inline. But this is only being used in this pipeline, so it's fine there. So when you find that you want to create something that's constantly reusable over and over and over again, this is another good example of that, where this is a Slack message that we're going to want to be able to kick off a message when we run this thing, so that we have the ability to know, hey, this pipeline got kicked off, and then moving on. And the goal is that this could then be used in other pipelines too. So if I wanted to do something different with CISCAT, I could do that as well. And then with CISCAT, we have, and this is where it gets really cool, is where we have CISCAT as a nested pipeline, and we're doing some other stuff with it as well. So we have our assessor here that we have built in as a first-class module, and so we have defined the session information. We actually have the benchmark information being passed in. So there's different ways that you can do this. You could pass in the benchmark information. We also have built in the ability to pick and choose the different benchmarks as well. So depending upon what you want to be able to do, you can pick the benchmarks that we have supplied as well, or you can override it and control exactly what you want to be able to pass in as an input, as a variable that we have here with that bars.benchmark. And then the goal is that there's other things that you can define as well. So Bill brought this up earlier. So we worked together on, we had a need to be able to pass the non-passing results to the remediation content and parse it out so that we could then run the remediation content against the particular OS. And so the goal here, and actually, Bill, do you want to chime in on anything around non-passing results?
Yeah, like I mentioned previously, like it's just a pretty standard JSON report which identifies the unique for that benchmark, the unique identifier of the recommendation that doesn't pass. So it could just be if everything is compliant, it would be an empty result. If not, it's just basically an array of rule IDs that come from the automation content that you can then use moving forward in a structured way for any tool that can interpret JSON results and or a JSON document and go from there.
Yeah, and it's pretty cool because it really opened up the ability for us to be able to utilize it. I mean, it's fairly simple in what we're getting from an object standpoint, right? But it's pretty powerful in what we can then utilize it for. And the other thing here is, so we have also built in different capabilities around being able to set the different reporting formats. So depending upon if you have CISCAT Lite or if you have, I guess all of these are technically Pro, but you have the ability to generate the different types of reports depending upon which version you have as well. And then also, the other piece here is the ability to post the results to URL. So if we were using a dashboard server, we'd actually put that in here, and you'd be able to then push your results to the dashboard server, which will take it's the JSON version. Is that correct?
It actually takes the asset reporting format.
Okay, yeah, that's right. So, and then it'll take that, and you'll have that available in the dashboard as well. So you have a lot of flexibility in what you want to be able to do there. And then if you want to get really into the weeds, or you have some really sophisticated use cases, you can also override everything. So we have built in the ability to override the entire config and your properties. So you have full control over what you want to do. And this is all available in CISCAT, but we have it available here in the module itself. And then when you're creating from the module as well, you have the ability to define as well the different things that you're going to define inside of the assessor. So there's a full YAML definition that's available as well. So if you want to be able to get in here and configure that as well, you have the opportunity to do that. And we have that in our documentation. So the overall key here is that a lot of flexibility on what you can configure when it comes to assessments. Here we have a bunch of different examples of what we're able to do here. One of the other nice things about CISCAT is the ability to tie in via SSH or WinRM. Other tools like OpenSCAP are very difficult and require you have to require an installer. So the nice thing about CISCAT 2 is it's agentless, so you don't have to deal with installing anything on the remote systems other than just making sure that they're bootstrapped to support the ability to connect via WinRM or SSH, which is usually works out of the box depending upon what your configuration settings are. But the key is that it's agentless too, so it's super nice when it comes to that. We did a bunch of stuff with OpenSCAP too, and CISCAT was so much easier to tie into other systems and be able to run scans and so on. So it's been awesome getting that in, because it's not only a super powerful tool, but it's also nice to use it by itself and also in our platform. And then there's a couple of the other things as well here is we're also here, and this again is kind of the points towards the flexibility of our platform, is that these are different, or these are just shell scripts and running some PowerShell. You can mix and match different modules that allow you to do whatever you want. So you have the ability to run, like you see here, run CISCAT, a shell script, a PowerShell script, and set some variables that we can use in another pipeline or by itself. And so that's kind of the overall key here, is that you can run different modules inside a pipeline, then create it into a reusable pipeline. And so that gives you the flexibility to have that here in this overall pipeline that gives you that nested here as CISCAT. And then you notice here, these are all of the variables that we have defined from the pipeline itself. So a lot of flexibility there. And then the last thing I'll touch on is this remediation content. So we have the ability to, here we're using Mindpoint Group's remediation content, and we have here where we can also pull in existing external content. So here we're cloning in that Ansible role, and then we actually write a inventory and then run the remediation here. And we have the ability to pass in, so we've defined different things here. This is where it gets a little bit more sophisticated, where we can actually pass in multiple rules of the string array. And so you have other data types that you have the ability to be able to configure the different data that you want to pass in, because there may be specific rules that you'll want to skip depending upon what you're trying to do. And so again, you have the power to be able to set what you want from there as these are defined. So, and you can define anything. So if there are other inputs that you want as well that you want to create, you can do that and create those variables to use those as well. All right, so once you're said and done, right? So you create all this content, you have it all ready to go. The goal here is then you obviously want to be able to run and iterate on the content. So if I wanted to, as I'm kind of working through things, I can run through this pipeline as I'm creating it and getting it all working and so on. And then once I'm ready with it, I have the ability to come in here and create a a job overlay on top of it. And then I can control the data that I want to be able to have as inputs to this particular job run. I also have the ability to set the different versions that I'm working on. So that way I have the ability to control the different types of data that I want to have that I'm going to pass in that get evaluated before it gets evaluated to the external systems. And then I can also suppress variables or outputs or events. And so we had some requests around being able to do that, where we want to be able to, maybe you don't want to show any information at all when it comes to the actual run, but for the purpose of this demo, we will show. So once you create the job, you have the ability to then scope in or create the different values of each of the variables you want in here. The nice thing is, depending upon if it's an environment or it's a different customer, however you need to structure it for your organization, or in a different department, you can scope a job and all of the variable values to a particular pipeline. So you can have a many-to-one approach where you create one pipeline and you create a bunch of different jobs that are controlling the data that goes into the actual pipeline. So here, the other nice thing is you can create conditionals as well inside of each. So if I wanted to build the infrastructure or not, and if I don't, then in this particular example that we're in here for today, then we have a condition set where it's going to actually then just use the IP address. So you can build more sophisticated pipelines and how you want things to be evaluated and adding conditionals depending upon what you want to do as you're building stuff out, and then controlling that on a per job overlay onto there. So once you have all of that all set in here and you're ready to go, you'll run this, and this will run in the runner backend. So this is where it's going to run through each one of the different steps here, and it'll give us the ability to also see the Slack message that pops up, where this will pop up, and then once this runs through, we will also show the assessment, and this will also show up the HTML report, which we'll bring up here in a second. And it looks like we're about at time to open it up for questions. So while that's running, let's open it up for questions. What do we have for questions? I know there's questions out there, so. Yeah, there's a Q&A box that you can drop your questions in, or if you raise your hand, we can also unmute you as well. So depending on if you want to ask the question live, or you can pop your questions into the Q&A box. Actually, what I'll show is a prior one for the sake of time. But the overall goal here is that we have the ability to first one, to see each one of these as they execute, and the ability to, oh, it looks like it just finished. Oh, it's updating that. Now it's running remediation content. So running through each one of these. So with CISCAT specifically, you'll see here, there's the full standard out, and then you can see every single rule as you go through, and the overall total score and where it's at as well. This is already a VM that we've used for other demos, so it has a very, very high score. But the nice thing is that you have the ability to see all of the rules that were collected in here. And then when we go run the remediation content, the same thing you would expect from Ansible to be able to see every single rule from the non-passing rule set that would be able to be seen in here as well. So once that's finished, then we pop that out to a HTML report that we have in a link inside of Slack. So that gives us the ability to then just click on it, open the link up, and then in here I have all of the assessment results that I can see in here as well. So the goal is then you have this now where you pop this out into an S3 bucket, and then an extension of this would be to be able to drop to be able to tie into the CISCAT Pro dashboard to where you can have that available as well. Bill, do you want to talk anything to the dashboard?
Yeah, sure. It's a web-based application again, and it's really designed to receive the asset reporting format that's generated there by default by the assessor. It provides a lot of cool looking, charts and graphs that allow you to pinpoint your assessments and monitor them over time. It lets you keep track of the different assets that have been assessed. You can tag all of those if in an arbitrary tagging system that allows you to kind of organize all of the different endpoints however you see fit. Yeah, it looks great just like that. It has capabilities to drill down through each of those graphs that you can kind of see there in the background and get down into individual assessment results that you can see in the foreground. Shows you very, again, detailed assessment information, just like the HTML report does. Again, gives you different views of that compliance over time. You can compare different assets. You can compare by different benchmarks. So you can see how your RHEL 7 boxes compare against your RHEL 8 boxes, things of that nature. You can also compare by different tags, so you can see how the IT department's machines look versus the finance department's versus the development team. So it's pretty flexible in that sense as well. And again, yeah, it just gives you a really good kind of nice bit of asset inventory along with the monitoring of configuration over time.
Awesome. Yeah, and it's great to use, and it's really nice when you have a lot of different systems and you want to compare results on different machines or different assessments. It's nice to see the historical data over time as well. So it looks like we have a question. So how is Refactr deployed? How long does it take to build your first automation? Great question. So currently we're a PaaS play. So there's a SaaS-based type front end, and then our back end is runner, can be deployed wherever you want. So you can deploy that on premise or in your own data center or your own cloud account. As for how long does it take to build your first automation, so depends on what you're trying to build. So I always advise organizations to start small. Some of the content that you've seen today, we're releasing to our catalog, so you'll be able to start from the catalog. But we also want to be clear that it's a starting point. It's not going to ever be exactly what you need for your organization, and so you should be prepared to kind of assess what it's going to take to build your first automation. But if you start small, it shouldn't take very much time at all, especially if you use a catalog pipeline to start off with. So we've seen people, other folks on their own be able to take one and run with it and be able to, within minutes, other than, setting up your credentials, be up and running. Now, to get it to a format where you want to be able to use it for your organization may take a little bit longer, but the overall key is once you build your first pipeline, it's all about being able to iterate on that pipeline or build other pipelines. And so you're able to start thinking about how you want to build automation. And what is the outcome of the automation that you're building out there. So if it's something as simple as Slack, you know, getting notifications every single time though may be important for your team because you want to know what's going on. So that's something you'll include. Super easy to add in. So I would say, you know, or something like CISCAT where you want to build out from something that already exists, but you may have, you know, 15 or 5, 6 different benchmarks you support. There's other orgs we've seen that support a lot more of those as well. So it's really about how you're able to support or how you're able to build what makes sense for your organization and how that maps to what your needs are. And especially when it comes down to like stuff like CISCAT, the ability to figure out, you know, what are the different benchmarks and remediation you need to be able to support what you need. And also, are you going to deploy it in the cloud, hybrid? And so we're seeing a lot of orgs deploying hybrid where they build out this content and want to run it both in the cloud and on premise. So we have another question. So how do you handle access control to Refactr, especially with various teams, credentials, etc.? Great question. So we have the ability to create, so you can create projects. And so on a per project basis, you can control your credentials, your pipeline content, everything is encapsulated into that particular project. So right now we control things at a project level. We have RBAC built in, so you can also control the type of access that they get to the project. And then one level up from that is the organization. So you can also control who has access to the organization and all the projects that exist under the organization. It looks like we have time for one more question. So can we explain or show the catalog? Great question. So we can, give me 1 second and I'll show you, and then we'll wrap up with that. So we have, let's go back to all right. So the catalog we have is essentially pre-built pipelines. So if you go click into one like the CISCAT Rel 8 and you want to open this up in a builder, you can see this is a pipeline that you can start off with that supports the ability to scan. You run a CISCAT assessment against a Rel 8 box, and then all you have to do is just clone this into your project. And so we have a bunch of pipelines available for that purpose. And so the goal there is that you can start off from here, but you're definitely going to want to make this pipeline your own. So you'll come in and be able to customize everything you want. And that's again where you'll also create a job overlay on that to control the data inside of there. So you have that capability as well. But you can take any of the pipelines that we have in our catalog, clone them into your project, and you can start using them yourself and editing them. Awesome. Well, those are great questions. Looks like we're at time. So I appreciate it. We'll couple of things just because we started a little bit late. Let me go ahead and just share out some contact information at the end. So it's available here in the presentation. That'll be available afterwards. So you can contact Bill and I if you have any other questions after the fact. We're both on LinkedIn, and you can email us. I'm also on Twitter as well under IT as Code. There's some other cool events coming up. You need to check out All Day DevOps in November. That's coming up, and I'm actually in a chapter of the last book they published, Feedback Loops. You can check that out, or you can reach out to Steph to ask her for a link to that. And then lastly, if you want to connect with CIS, Bill, anything you want to add here?
No, I don't think so. I think it's got all of the cool contact info.
Exactly, and same thing with Refactr. So that wraps it up today. If you have questions, feel free to reach out to us when it comes to anything on the Refactr side or on the CIS side. Bill and I are always available to ask questions about anything, and keep on the lookout for new cool stuff coming on with Refactr and CIS. Thank you everybody for attending today. Really appreciate it.